Hello everybody, and welcome to the panel discussion, supporting psychology students through their university journey, study skills, well-being and employability, with Christian van Nieuwerburgh, Paul Dickerson and Emma McDonald. I just want to check that everybody can hear me okay. Fantastic. Okay, so my name is Fawzia Eastwood. I'm a marketing manager at Sage Publishing on the psychology textbooks portfolio. I'm a cisgender woman from a South Asian background. I have long brown highlighted hair and brown eyes, and I'm wearing a blue and flowered blouse, and my pronouns are she and her. So before we start today's session, I'd like to mention a little bit of housekeeping. We have switched off the cameras and muted the microphones for all participants except for the presenters. This is so that everyone will be able to enjoy the discussion without background noise. The chat box won't be available during this webinar either. However, you can write any questions that you might have for the panel in the question and answer box, and we'll reply to as many of those as we can during the session, and then we'll follow up with any that we didn't get around to answering today. We would ask that you take advantage of our presenters' expertise and focus any questions that you have around the content of today's webinar. So this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available on the Sage Publishing YouTube channel over the next few days. We'll also share it via email and on our Twitter page at Sage Psychology. And we've made closed captions available during this webinar, so do turn them on if those are helpful for you. Sage Psychology has been supporting journeys to knowledge for over 50 years, and we are driven by the belief that social and behavioural science has the power to improve society. We are proud to produce high-quality resources that support instructors and inspire the future leaders in the field. We're delighted today to be hosting this dynamic discussion on psychology skills, focusing on well-being, study skills and employability for psychology students, which will take the format of a panel discussion from our authors, who we're delighted to have joining us to talk on these key themes in these areas, and taken from their respective books. For those of you who haven't yet got the Psychology Skills Bundle or any of the great books it contains, it is available from our webpage or from your bookseller. You can see the QR code on screen, and you could also kind of just follow the website www.sagepub.co.uk to find out. The three books in the bundle are written or co-written by our panel members and are from Surviving to Thriving by Christian van Nieuwerburgh, How to Write Brilliant Psychology Essays, Paul Dicson, and The Psychology Guides to Study and Employability Skills by Graham Davey, and contributed to by Emma McDonald. During the session, we welcome your questions on the topics, so do submit those via the question and answer box. And I'm now delighted to introduce our panel. Welcome to our presenters. So we have with us today Dr. Christian van Nieuwerburgh. He's a professor in positive psychology and coaching at the Royal College of Surgeons and Global Director of Growth Coaching International. Previously, he was a program leader and senior lecturer within the coaching psychology programs at the University of East London, one of the world's leading centres for the postgraduate study of coaching. He is a well-respected executive coach, internationally recognised academic and sought-after consultant, and is the co-author of Sages from Surviving to Thriving, a practical hands-on book which helps students to understand, experience and put into practice skills and strategies to improve and sustain their well-being so that they can thrive during their time at university. With underpinning scientific theory and knowledge showing why these things work, the book focuses on practical activities that will make a difference to students' university experience. Dr. Paul Dixon is Principal Teaching Fellow at the University of Roehampton, where he has taught for over 25 years. His research has predominantly adopted a qualitative approach and has largely focused on issues of talk, interaction, and autism. He has written a social psychology textbook, which sought to empower students to engage critically with the material presented. The second edition of this is currently in preparation with Sage. Paul's latest book, Sage Publishing, How to Write Brilliant Psychology Essays, was written to help students to feel empowered to express their thoughts and ideas in writing, achieve their full potential, and rediscover the joy of learning. And Dr. Emma McDonald is a chartered psychologist with a passion for psychology and education. Emma is a senior lecturer at Cardiff Metropolitan University in the Cardiff School of Education and Social Policy. In addition, Emma is an external examiner and also works closely with the British Psychological Society and on the QAA Psychology Benchmark Advisory Group. Emma held teaching posts in psychology at Birmingham City, Oxford Brookes University, the Open University, University of Plymouth, and Cardiff University. She is a contributing author on the Psychology Student's Guide to Study and Employability, published this year by Sage. The textbook is a handy guide interweaving both study skills and employability skills, providing advice across all 3 years of a psychology degree. And I'd now like to introduce the first of our panelists, who is Christian van Nieuwerburgh.
Thank you so much, Fauzia. How a lovely introduction. Let me just say that a little bit about myself. I identify as male. I've got brown hair, fairly light complexion, bit of suntan, I hope, at the moment. I present as a white person, but in fact, my mother was Japanese, my father was Belgian, and I grew up in the Middle East. Today, I'm wearing a bright orange shirt because this is a very special occasion.
Lovely. Thank you very much for being with us, Christian. I have a number of questions here, and it'd be great if, I'd love to hear your thoughts on these. And obviously, you know, very excited about your new book, which is out at the moment. And I know a lot of the thoughts and themes that we'll be discussing today will be taken from your book and your work. So the first question is, how can lecturers look after themselves as they look out for their students' well-being?
This is a wonderful question, Fauzia, and so timely, I guess, for all of us, and hopefully everybody who's attending this either live or the recording will resonate with this question. And this is going to be a theme, Fauzia, through my responses to all of the questions that are addressed to me, which is how do we as lecturers, academics, educators, how do we look after ourselves so that we can be the best possible educators for the students that we work with? So that's always an ongoing theme for me. And as you say, this book, From Surviving to Thriving, the purpose of it, you know, working with Paige Williams, who's at the University of Melbourne, we went out to positive psychology experts specifically with that question about what sort of things can we do to look after our well-being. And I just want to share one example. So one thing we can do is be aware of some well-being theories. And one of the best known well-being theories is the Perma Model, devised by Professor Martin Seligman. And Perma, it's got 5 elements. And according to Seligman, if we're experiencing these 5 elements, we're more likely to be experiencing well-being, or in fact, flourishing or thriving. So for people to be thriving, they need to have these 5 elements. So I think one thing that we can do as educators, academics, and lecturers is just do kind of self-assessment to see, are we getting these things ourselves? And then, of course, when we interact with our students, we can have the well-being theory in mind, and we can support them to get the things that they need in order to experience well-being. And I'll outline these 5 things very briefly. But my main message, Fauzia, is that particularly now, we should be intentional about our well-being. Perhaps in the past, we could have taken it a little bit for granted. We were getting quite a lot of the things we needed for our well-being through our daily interactions. But, you know, particularly students over the last 3 years and educators as well, we've had such a challenging time. So the 5 elements are we need to be experiencing positive emotions. So that's just a little reminder that whether you're a student or an educator, making sure that we build in moments during our weeks where we're doing things purely for the enjoyment of those things. So that's a little reminder because it's essential for our well-being. Second thing is engagement is very important. The E in PERMA is for engagement. And it's very important for our well-being that we're engaged in something. Now, if you're a student, that could be in your education. If you're an educator, it could be in your professional role, but it could be in anything. But the important thing is that we wake up every day feeling engaged with something. Then, of course, positive relationships. And how important are those? And how challenged have we been during the pandemic to keep those relationships alive? But positive relationships are important for us. So again, my thought about that is it's very important for us to invest in relationships and support networks. Then we've got meaning and purpose, very important for people to be clear about that sense of purpose. What is it that drives them? And then the last one, which is the A for achievement or accomplishment. For us to experience well-being or to be thriving or flourishing, we need to get a sense that we're achieving things that are important to us. And therefore, my recommendation is that we acknowledge the achievements we are making. So whether you're a student or an academic, maybe cast your mind back over the last 3 years and note down the things that you actually have achieved despite all of the challenges. And those are the 5 elements, Fauzia, might be helpful for people just to keep in mind.
Some excellent kind of points there, and these are sometimes things that we often forget ourselves. And when we're asking our students to do these things, sometimes not forgetting our own health and our own well-being of academics amongst us. This is something that's key before we start to help others, help yourselves. That takes me on to the next question, which is actually drawn on from that previous thing you mentioned about connecting and the meaningful and purpose. For that. So how can we all reconnect with meaning and purpose? And how does this help improve the university experience when you're a student, for example?
Great. So meaning and purpose, well, it's such an important thing. And in our book, Fauzia, we have a chapter on this by Professor Michael Steger. He's at Colorado State University. He actually heads up a Center for Meaning and Purpose. And I guess the key takeaway here is that for us to flourish or to experience well-being, we do need to have our own way of understanding what is meaningful about what I do, and it's helpful for us to have a sense of purpose. So, for the listeners here, I guess 2 questions pop into my head that might be helpful. One is, what's most important about what it is that you do? So if you're a student, what's most important about being a student? If you're a lecturer, what's most important about that? And of course, it's great to have some time for reflection. Ideally, you could be going out for a walk in nature and just mulling that question over, because that's what I meant, Fauzia, by reconnecting, because it's there. There's a reason we are students. There's a reason we are lecturers. So reconnecting, but maybe even better, linking back to what I said in the previous question, what if you could find a colleague or other students and just set aside a time, maybe over a cup of coffee or something, 3 or 4 of you, just sharing with each other what's really important for you about your time at university. And that, of course, applies for the academics as well. And for academics, the question I'd be curious about is what drew you to academia, and kind of reminding ourselves of going for that first academic job. What is it that excited us? And the reason we want to reconnect with this is that's where a lot of our energy is. That's where our motivation is. That's, it's about trying to connect with intrinsic motivation, because it is acknowledging we've been through challenging times, and we need to adapt, we need to invest, And of course, the question becomes, where do we get the energy to do those things? And for me, the energy is in our sense of purpose.
Fantastic. It's very important to have those reminders in ourselves. And that actually leads on to the next question for you, Christian, is actually this world has changed beyond a lot of everyone's recognition actually over the last few years. So in a world that has changed dramatically over the last few years, how can we find ways to cultivate hope?
Yeah, now I mentioned right at the beginning that I was born in Beirut, Lebanon, in the Middle East, I said. So I grew up during wartime, and I learned through personal experience how important hope is. And I'd always thought I wanted to find out more about that. And that's probably why I got interested in positive psychology, because in positive psychology, there's a psychological construct of hope. So this is beyond the kind of the wishful thinking, I hope we get a good day, good weather tomorrow. This is the psychological construct of how hope can motivate us and feed our well-being. So again, for listeners, and I'll keep this very brief, according to Schneider and Lopez, who are at the University of Kansas, who came up with hope theory, and you can read about this. There's a great book called How Hope Happens, I think. 3 components. And this is important, I think, for us as academics to remain hopeful, but also so that we can support our students to be hopeful. So according to this theory, there's 3 components necessary for people to feel hopeful. One is, it's important that there's a clear desired future state. So it's important for us as academics, and also important for students, to be able to imagine, let's say 3 to 5 years from now, what they would like to be happening, and for that to be desirable. So that's the first thing that's needed. Second thing that's needed is pathways thinking. So once we have an idea of where we'd like to be, the next thing that's important is being able to see multiple routes towards that desired future. And the third thing, and this is where I think we as academics and educators can really support our students, you need that sense of agency or self-belief. People need to believe that they have what it takes to pursue one of those pathways that I just talked about. So that's a simple way of thinking about hope, and breaking it down into components that we can build in ourselves or support in others. So just a few thoughts from me, Fawzia, based on the book, as we've said, but we tried to pick out some of the things that might be most helpful for our listeners today.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And I'd just like to ask other members of our panel, Emma and Paul, if they had anything that they want to add to that, or any of their experiences they'd like to share in those areas.
Yes, actually, I found that incredibly helpful. So thank you, Christian, for going through that. I think some really, really great thoughts that can help to transform the experience for ourselves and our students. I just wondered where, obviously there's been a lot of work on mindfulness in recent years, and I wondered how you saw that fitting in with some of the models that you've been developing here.
Thank you, Paul. Really helpful. Yeah, mindfulness, it's a great example. Positive psychology as a field, it's been around for just over 20 years, relatively young. But the good thing about positive psychology is it's been doing a lot of research into human beings at their best. And these mindfulness-based interventions are some that have the most secure scientific support behind them. But essentially, so mindfulness could be helpful, but essentially what we're looking for both academics and students is ways that they can feel grounded, settled, and perhaps, ways to manage levels of anxiety. And anxiety, given everything that's going on, would probably be normal, reasonable levels of anxiety. So finding strategies to manage that. And so the mindfulness techniques, there's apps for it now. You can go and study an 8-week course. So I would highly recommend that to students and staff. And at the same time, I would say it doesn't have to be mindfulness. It might not work for everyone. There are lots of ways that are pretty individual about how do we calm ourselves down? How do we, in other words, how do we get ourselves into the right state of mind, either to be the most inspiring educator ever, or to be the most committed learner ever? And, you know, that's the question. How do we get ourselves into the right state of mind? It could be going for a walk. It could be going for a swim. It could be taking time on your own. It could be doing yoga. And I really recommend, and that was the strategy behind the book, is we're not saying here are 10 things to do. We're just saying here are some strategies. Have a look, find out what works really well for you. But that's a great point, Paul. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask Emma, did you have anything to add to that?
I'd just say I really support all your points, and one of the things that's interesting is how you take it from students to also staff as well. One of the things I often say to students is think about your career and your ambitions, and when you're having a subject, especially on a psychology degree, you find challenging. So when you're thinking about, say, a lot of students aren't the biggest fan of stats, think about, well, how am I going to use it in my future career? And then that will help you overcome the challenge with it. But I didn't really think about it in terms of applying it to staff and staff wellbeing as well. So it's a really interesting point you've made.
Thanks, Emma. And, you know, I think it's entirely appropriate that we've stayed focused on students, and students have had an incredibly tough time over the pandemic. But we do want to also acknowledge that it's been a particularly difficult time for academic staff as well, having to learn new ways of presenting, sometimes having to deliver virtually and in person. So I like the idea that, you know, as an educational community, we're more intentional about our well-being. And of course, there's a link between the well-being of students and the well-being of staff. I believe that very strongly.
Definitely, those are some very, very good additional points there. And yes, the one can't happen without the other, I would say. And I think that's what all of you have been saying as well. So thank you very much, Christian. And we hope to hear from you again a little bit later as well. But just moving on to our next series of questions, which will be around more about the student experience and more precisely their study skills. And just taking it over to our next panelist, Paul Dickerson. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you very much, Fawzia, and thank you, Christian and Emma. Just to introduce myself, I am a cisgendered British male with blue eyes. I wear glasses. I'm actually reading this out, which you'd think I'd know who I was by now, but I have a beard and I have long, slightly scraggy brown hair. There's some grey, but I am, strictly between ourselves, wearing quite a lot of product today, so the grey may be obscured. I'm also wearing a blue jacket and a rather saturated red t-shirt underneath.
Thank you, and lovely to have you here today, Paul. So the previous kind of discussion was talking about, you know, kind of ensuring that people do practice mindfulness, practice looking after themselves, you know, all of these important things to ensure that good experience both for students and for lecturers. But where does it become from looking after yourself to looking after yourself too much? I mean, when does procrastination start to, you know, rear its ugly head? What can students do to overcome procrastination? Because let's face it, this is something that students at any stage of their career have done.
I think that's a great question. Yeah. So with procrastination, what can we do to overcome procrastination? I think just touching base, and I think I will reference Christian, hopefully without plagiarizing your fine ideas. There is this gap that we can build between ourselves as the academic staff and the students. And it is useful, I think, to reflect on our own experiences of procrastination and to just bear that in mind when we're thinking about the skills that we want our students to experience. So I'm just going to touch on a few things. You know, I think we, having had the COVID context of the last 2.5 years, having had the phenomenal technology as a distractor in our lives, at least since the smartphones of 2007 onwards, I think we have to acknowledge that distraction and being blocked is quite a big issue. So I just want to talk through a few. I'll have a very practical orientation here, but just to say what's the kind of driving concept beneath this. I think that if we want to learn how to be good at different types of writing, perhaps creative writing, I think that there are many, many courses, books, etc., that we can go to get really stimulating ideas. And I think I want us to develop just as good resources, really, for supporting students with academic writing that get to the heart and the soul, if you like, of really good academic writing. So that's a kind of philosophical bent beneath all of this. Okay, so I was having conversation last week with two people who are about to start their university degrees in different subjects, different universities. And today, this afternoon, I was chatting to one of my postgraduate students who's about to submit her doctoral thesis. And with both of them, the conversation around being blocked came up. And one thing that struck me, if you don't mind me drawing an illustration here, so I'm picking up, I'm not going to play my guitar, but I am going to pluck a string on it. So I have my guitar on screen now, one of my guitars, and we've got to get the tension, so you can just see my guitar on screen. I'm going to do it again. We've got to get the tension right for the musical instrument, string musical instrument to play. I mean, probably if I'm playing it, it might not make much difference, to be quite honest. But I think the thing is that we can be too tight about every sentence, every paragraph being right. And I've seen that blocking those who are finishing their A-levels, those who are finishing their thesis. And if we're too loose, we might never get started. We might not shape our thoughts at all. But I think more often we have an issue about the string, if you like. This is where the analogy is, in case you missed it, the string being too tight rather than too loose. We feel it's got to be right. And I thought when I was chatting with my one of my postgrads today about this, if this was put into a social situation, it would be like not being able to utter a sentence because you thought that what you had to say was not helpful, accurate, worth saying. Now, some people may experience this at different times in their life, different forms of social anxiety. But what we don't want is a sort of digital academic anxiety hampering us from even getting started. All of our writing is imperfect. Let's not be too tight that it's got to be right. And linked to this, and very much linked to some of what Christian was saying there, we need to find a way of empowering our agency. I think the ideas that Christian was touching on there, acknowledging our achievements, I think that's excellent. I think we need that to free ourselves. For me, this is part of a conversation that we need to be almost a coach to ourselves. We need to be, the friend on side for ourselves. We need to be as supportive and as encouraging of ourselves as we would be to a friend who was experiencing blocks and procrastination. And just to kind of stand that for a moment longer, we've got to be easy both on ourselves and on the critical voice. So it's no good bashing ourselves or stopping from bashing ourselves and then just having a go, I shouldn't tell myself off, because I think that's still that negative cycle. So let's step back, be easy and supportive of ourselves. We've got that critical voice, lots of reasons probably, but in part because we care about what we want to do. We want to do it really well. We want it to be really, really good. And so the critical voice is coming from a good place and has actually a role to play, but not a blocking role. We don't, again, it's like that string. We want it just the right degree of tension. And finally, I would say, Christian mentioned right at the top there, enjoyment and engagement. And I think that's what we need in here as well. We've probably, if we are recurrent procrastinators, if we've done it more than once, we've probably already tried to marshal ourselves into good behavior and getting on with the work and so on. And that maybe has not been entirely successful. We need to charm our ways in. When we were little, I think we did not have this separation between work and play. the young child is exploring, playing, learning, and then something I kind of could go off on one here, so I'll keep it brief. Something possibly about our educational system experience creates a separation between play, enjoyment, schooling, education, and so on. I think we've got to bring these two together. University is a fantastic opportunity to do that because we very much choose our topic. To some extent, we choose our modules. We may choose our essays, our projects, etc. There's more choice. We need to bring back the joy of what we're doing. If we can connect, as Christian was talking about, enjoyment, if we can find enjoyment in our work, we can charm ourselves, not tell ourselves off into working, then I think we're on the right path.
Fantastic. Thank you, Paul. I love that analogy as well of, you know, kind of just of the speaking situation and not being able to speak if you were scared of that as you were of writing. So it's always going to stick in my mind now, that particular instance, because it's very visual. Excellent. Okay. So then, bearing in mind all of the things that you've mentioned and all of these great kind of, you know, ideas and tips to help people and this advice to give them, what are some other quick tips that can really transform students' writing? You know, something that will really make a difference almost, I won't say immediately because it's a craft, it's a form, as we've been seeing, but what are some quick tips that will transform their writing? Okay, I think, thank you very much for the question, for one. So some quick tips. I think just a really quick one that I've found has worked with students over the years. I think of the reader. Now, this is a kind of bit of a stolen tip in a way, because this tip is used a lot in creative writing. So if you want to go on a creative writing course, read creative writing books, there'll be a lot of a sense of the reader to whom we're writing. I think we get so carried away with the knowledge base of what we want to communicate, this can be a stumbling block. Now, let's just kind of, again, come back to this concept that was there right at the top in what Christian was saying. We need to think sometimes not just about this separation of the student experience as being completely different to our experience. So I've noticed in my own writing, if I'm trying to cram in lots and lots of information, I lose something of the treatment of that information. So I think let's keep our reader, our dear reader, very much in mind. I think this will transform everything, actually. So if we imagine that the reader has maybe set the aim of the work, possibly the title of the work, the parameters of the work. If there's a title, the reader, our reader, marker, cares about that title. They have created it. It's so easy here, I think, to see, oh, it's a Milgram, Piaget essay, Freud, Longstore memory, and we just go off on what we know there. And it's quite understandable. And I think maybe we've all done it. But I think we've got to stop and we've got to think, someone actually wrote this title, not another one a bit like it, but this actual title. And so realizing it's not just a Piaget essay, but it's a critique of the methodology that Piaget used. That is getting into reader's mind, thinking like a reader, thinking like a marker. And that's really important. So we think of our reader marker and think how they were with the very title onwards, I think we'll be going in a good direction. Now let's stay with that thread of thinking of the reader a moment longer. Let's think about your argument. An idea that I raised about 30 years ago. I would like to think as a child prodigy, but maybe I was a little bit older. One idea that I think is very important is the so what question. And I've said to students for a long time, we should think that one of our jobs in writing our essays and other assignments is that we can't have the reader stroke marker asking the question, so what? Or why am I being told this? Now, if they ask that question, we've got to kind of somehow re-edit our work so that they no longer ask that question. Now, what's that getting at? That's getting at argument. Again, it's linked to answering the question, but it has to be clear how our paragraphs interconnect in an argument that's being formed that answers the question, but a very simple, crystallized, two-word
sentence that we could take away here is, so what? We have that in mind when we're writing. That could take out a lot of problems, because we want to be stopping our reader from asking the so what question. And finally, just to bear in mind that it is very much about, as I was saying earlier, and I acknowledge with some of my own work where I've not written stuff that's communicated as well as I'd wanted. I think I'm going cram in the knowledge, show off the knowledge, and I'm not looking at the treatment of that knowledge. And I think this is the key thing, that we've got to get into the reader's mind. The reader is trying to, ironically, get into our mind. They're trying to look at the mind at work in the essay. They're trying to say, how is this student, how is this writer writing and treating and thinking about the issues involved in this assignment? And if we can have that in mind with our own writing, that we communicate our treatment, that will encourage us to be critical. That will encourage us to have a tight argument. That will encourage us to have a strong conceptual conclusion. So in a nutshell, let's think of our dear reader.
Fantastic. Thank you. Some very fantastic tips and advice there that I think people can start applying straight away and have in mind. You mentioned, the audience, and you mentioned the reader and the marker. So let's not get away from the fact that, a lot of the essay writing that psychology students are doing are there to gain grades and to improve their kind of scores, let's say, their grades and scores. So what are the most effective ways to help students to improve their essay writing? Going on from what you've already said, any additional things that you could share there?
Absolutely. Thank you very much for asking this. And this is something I've asked my students. I've conducted surveys with them in relation to study skills sessions, and also chatted with them in terms of anecdotal feedback. And I want to make sure that it is the most effective. And I'm just going to throw in one thing that I think, again, Christian touched on, which concerns self-reflection. I think we actually need to reflect on our practice. So that is a kind of watchword. We've got to keep reflecting on whether our practice is empowering our students. If you don't mind me using another prop, my last prop, I do promise you, then I purchased something online, and it was kind of quite a complex desk. And I kind of wound up with some spare pieces, and this is one of them. So I'm holding here a black board with some rails on the side, and it kind of just didn't fit in. I couldn't work out how it fitted in. And there were actually no instructions with the thing that I purchased. There was the final image. So it told me what I've got to end up with, but it didn't show me how to get there. Now, I think with our feedback, the constraints on it and so on, we don't have the time and opportunity to tell our students most of the time how to make the changes that we want them to make. We can tell them what we want, get a stronger, more conceptual conclusion, try to develop a more effective introduction, interconnect your paragraphs more, critically analyze rather than just describe. Now, those can be useful, and we may put links in that help students follow up on that. We may throw in a sentence or two. A lot of the time with a lot of our feedback, certainly when we're dealing with large volumes, we might not have the opportunity to tell students how. We tell them what, we don't tell them how. It's like IKEA furniture without the instructions. So we're struggling, or students are struggling, because what they want to know is how. And I've seen students present at learning and teaching conferences, and one of their heartfelt requests is, please don't just tell us what to do, tell us how to do what you want us to do. So I think one of the most effective ways that we can help our students is to show them how. One of the things that I'm particularly keen on is showing good and bad academic writing. The examples I use, I generate myself, partly because I did not want to use any examples of what I deemed to be bad student writing. I'd soon just write my own examples. So good and bad. If we show samples of good and not so good academic writing, hopefully generated by ourselves, then I think students can see the difference, and we can actually show them what that difference is. We can get students to reflect. Maybe a workshop activity might be for them to identify, to mark these samples of writing, to talk about what makes sample A better or worse than sample B, and so on, and to look at what would be necessary to turn the bad into the good. It's also actually useful, though slightly counterintuitive, to sometimes turn the good into the bad. It's quite fun in a way to try and do it that way around. So I think that can be quite useful to show examples of good, bad writing, to get students. We talked a lot about this, the separation of the role of student and academic can be disadvantageous for everyone. Getting students to be the marker enables them to do that thing I was talking about right at the beginning, about getting into the reader marker's mind, thinking like a reader, thinking like a marker. So I think that can be very good. And I think we've got to meet our students where they are. I think when we can connect with their, again, to use a term Christian referred to, their purpose, then we can start to empower them. If we can connect with what they're struggling with, if we can listen to them, reflect on our own practice, then we can start to empower our students. And our practice, I've just mentioned 2 or 3 different techniques, but I think our practice has to be forward-looking, changing, and responsive to our students. If we're self-reflecting, accepting that we ourselves are writing and it doesn't always flow beautifully all the while, if we are listening to our students, and if we're connecting with their purpose and what they want to achieve, we can really empower them so that they can achieve that.
Thank you. Thank you for addressing those questions. And they're all very, very, very relevant, especially in today's climate. I'd just like to open those up to the rest of the panel if you had anything that you wanted to add. I know both of you have elements of your books which are also about study skills. Is there anything in particular for the writing aspect that you want to add to here?
So there were 2 things that I kind of wanted to pick up on. And the first was your analogy with the guitar string. And one of the things that I think is really important is similarly to apply that to stress, because
Definitely.
Feeling stressed is something that we want to normalize with students. Now, not at a pathological level, but feeling some stress and being able to manage that stress, again, can be good. It will actually motivate us to do things. And quite often I have students come to me and say, I feel stressed. And I try and break it down with them. I'm like, is this a normal level of stress? Can we manage it? So again, it's all about that string and tuning it. The second thing I was going to bring up is the when you talk about voice, about who you're writing for. And I think sometimes when we set assignments, we don't tell the students who they're writing for. Sometimes we do, especially when we're saying tell them to write for a lay audience, but with kind of maybe a standard essay, especially early on in the degree, we don't tell students who they're writing for. And I think if we made that clearer, it can often be helpful, because that thing of packing, when students don't know kind of how much detail to go into, especially when we want to write students write concisely, that if we told them nice and clearly, you are writing for somebody who has a degree in psychology, then it gives them a kind of baseline to work with.
Thank you so much, Emma. Sorry, I'm writing notes from this. It's really great. So the who you're writing for, I think you're absolutely right, that I think we can be much more clear in how we set assignments and the outline of what's required for those assignments that we might put up on a Moodle page or whatever, who the audience is, who the student should be writing for. And you're absolutely right, that would help enormously. And your point about stress, yeah, I couldn't agree more. I've particularly addressed this when I'm thinking about exams. because I think it can be so negative and self-fulfilling that people can be stressed and then stressed about being stressed, and it can be such a vicious cycle. To almost befriend the stress and to see it at a subpathological level as actually it gets us engaged and motivated, and it may come in part from a good place of wanting to do well and so on, that to normalize the stress and to keep it in productive, positive levels, I think is a really great idea. So that kind of way of mobilizing the stress, that kind of inverted U of performance with stress, and trying to hit the sweet spot, I think is really, really a lovely point. Thank you for raising that.
Thanks, Paul. Just this idea of bringing joy back into education really is inspiring. So thank you so much, Paul. And the great thing is you did that for us. I love the guitar. Nice to see that. The analogies were wonderful. And, it's very clear how committed and passionate you are about student learning. So I guess our question, within the university sector is, how do we really allow academics and educators to thrive and flourish? Because it's obvious once we are thriving and flourishing, our main focus is on how do we support students. That's our meaning and purpose, isn't it? And tying into what you said, Paul, about I'm the reader and the marker sometimes. And it doesn't just give me joy that the student has got a high mark. It gives me joy that they've learned what we've been talking about.
Absolutely.
So I just love how all of those things connect. Thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you very much for your comments. I couldn't agree more. And I think that sense of our raison d'etre, I think, is really important, and something that we ourselves need to keep alive, that if we're working in large university hierarchies, it's important that people who may be more distant from the face-to-face students actually keep that alive as well. Just how important it is to share the passion and to enable students, empower students and inspire them, and just enabling them to find, as you were saying, their purpose and to reach their full potential. That I quite agree. It's not just about getting the high grade, but it's about students having a breakthrough, students making a leap forward, and starting to have that sense of fulfillment, purpose, and achieving what they've set out, and going, in some cases, going beyond their achievement. And that is wonderful.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you, Christian and Emma, for that very, very interesting discussion. And there are some very fantastic takeaways there to kind of bear in mind, both for the student and for the educator. So I'd like to move on to the next set of our webinar, and we'd like to take it over to, sorry, bear with me a second, to Emma McDonald, who's going to be discussing study skills and employability. Welcome to the session, Emma.
Hi. So just to start off by telling you a bit about myself. So I'm Emma McDonald. I'm a dyslexic white female in my early 40s. I have blonde brown hair tied back in a ponytail, glasses and a headset on. And what you can see behind me is the lovely campus of Cardiff Met University, where I work.
Fantastic. Lovely to have you on today's webinar. So we'll jump straight into the questions, shall we? So Emma, I'd like to ask you, in terms of time, students are at university for a finite amount of time. So when would you say is the most critical period for students to learn study skills?
So it's always a good time to learn study skills, and it's never too late. I picked up some tips from this webinar myself, but I'd say in terms of during the university career, I think level 4 is that really important point there. Especially as lecturer staff, we can kind of really push students and really kind of spend a lot of time building those study skills. And part of learning those study skills is getting students to appreciate that they're important and engage with them when they are at level 4, because sometimes we have this terrible myth that goes around that level 4 doesn't matter, level 4 doesn't count. So all I need to do is get by So things like showing them the idea of you're going up a ladder, and each year we expect you to learn and we expect you to get better. So what we expect of you from level 4, we'll expect more of you at level 5 and then more again at level 6. So by talking to them about things like the progressive nature of the degree, how we ask people to build on it, and really kind of push students to kind of get the basics right at level 4, I think it's really important. And one of the things that I say, a bit tongue-in-cheek, but when we're thinking about the NSS, if we push them hard at level 4, then it gives them time to forgive us by level 6 and they fill in the NSS. Level 4 is also a really kind of crucial time for when students quite often are likely to drop out of university and disengage. And again, it's often down to bad study habits and bad study skills. So again, if we're kind of really embedding them and engaging students with those study skills at level 4, and also noticing if students aren't engaging at level 4, then we've got the opportunity to kind of pick them up and support them so they don't become a statistic. The other thing that's, again, I see quite often, I speak to A-level teachers, is study skills can be taught before students come to university. So again, just getting criticality is one of those words that kind of scares a lot of students. So having A-level teachers often engage with their students and get them to start thinking about criticality can really help students when they come to university, and we expect it more often, can really help, again, get over that scares, like the critically analyze this piece of work, and students go, oh, I don't understand what it is. So kind of just using that word and saying we are doing a critical discussion and helping students kind of operationalize what that means can really support them.
Thank you very much, Emma, for that. So that takes me on to the next question. We talk a lot about support here. We talk a lot about kind of giving students the tools earlier on, but also how do we create an environment that supports students' well-being on the course? How do we create an environment that supports student well-being on the course?
So I think the big thing here is that it's often about the community that you build within the course, how you get students engaged with one another, and working with one another is key, especially when you have these massive courses where you have hundreds. Now I think some universities are talking about thousands in a single year group. Then I say you personally couldn't do that, but what you can do is really kind of work on the community aspect. So things like building in activities, so from the very start, your induction week, not making it about giving students information, it's getting students to work together, getting students to know each other is really important. And again, through our assessments, it can be painful sometimes, but actually getting students to work together in groups, it does force people to engage, and sometimes people can be a little bit nervous about working in groups, but if you have an assessment where you're required to work together, then that can be, again, really beneficial. But also in our seminars, we can get students to engage, get students to talk. Often, sometimes you can be the unpopular one and mix up students in a room so they don't just stay with their friends, they get to know one another, because then that kind of builds a bit of resilience, because if they do fall out with their friends, then they know other people on the course as well. So I think that's a really important part. The other really important thing is a good student representation system. So having kind of course reps that kind of have this really positive relationship with staff and other students. and really kind of staff empowering the course reps to get to know the students and get to go out and seek opinions, and then also talking to staff about them. And sometimes they may come back with things which aren't popular, and it's just about staff trying to work out a way of responding positively to the students, even if it might be something that's completely out of control, like I don't like the food in the canteen. Again, trying to work out a way of being a positive response to that. So I think one of the key things is that community aspect and that collaboration with staff. And another thing not to forget is the personal tuition system. So one of the things that we've got a lot better of is using things like Teams now, which can, again, you can start having more online meetings, more kind of virtual group meetings, which again, you can, as personal tutors, you can have those where you may not have had the kind of facilities. It's very hard quite often in a university to find a room to meet your students in. So using some of the things that we've learned from having to work solely online to really help meet our students. So my answer is basically all about community and community building with your students.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Emma. So that takes us on to another, well, taking us into the future a little bit. So students obviously will be thinking about the end goal. They'll be thinking about what will happen after university. So what is your top tip to improve students' employability?
So my number one tip is about getting students onto and engaging with a platform like LinkedIn. And LinkedIn is kind of the global platform which leads in this. And it's really, I think it's really important to start students thinking about how they're projecting themselves out in the world, how they're starting to build up their professional networks. One of the things I used to say to our students is, look at our current, obviously now ex-Prime Minister. Do you think he got to where he is today solely on his own, or do you think he used a lot of his networks and friendships and collaborations? And they all said, yes, absolutely. I said, well, that's the same for you. Think about how you're going to build those networks. Think about how you're going to use those professional networks. And again, I use the example of influencers. I say, if you talk to any successful influencer, they don't get the millions of followers overnight. It takes time to build them. So again, it's trying to get students to engage with a platform like LinkedIn early on, get them to create a decent profile, and then also getting them to post regularly on it, talking about their successes, their achievements, sometimes their failures. That can be also useful, because I've noticed that especially with the clinical psychology applications, you get so many posts on there from people that have got into the courses, but you also get posts on there saying, I applied for the clinical psychology doctorate this year and I didn't get in. But then they often get support from the community about kind of how they can improve. So I think that's just my one kind of top tip for employability is getting students to kind of create that LinkedIn profile and then getting them to post on it and use it. And another top tip with the LinkedIn profiles is that you can put your skills on there. So you can put what skills that you have developed, and you can get other people will go on there and say, yes, I agree that they've got that skill. So again, this is a great thing that you can do throughout the course, is signpost students to say, look, during this module, we've developed these skills. Why don't you add them to your LinkedIn profile? Because we get too many students getting to the end of their degrees and you see their CVs and they just go BSc psychology and they don't say anything about that. And we know that sometimes psychology is undervalued by people outside the world. They don't understand how many skills you develop throughout the course. So making them explicit is really important.
Thank you, Emma. Some really great tips there. And especially very timely in this day and age where it's harder to network physically. So the social media networking and the power of LinkedIn and what it can do for our career is invaluable right now. So obviously it's not the same across the board, but from the other side, from another angle, what do you think staff often overlook when it comes to employability for their students? Sorry.
Yeah, and I think it's something that I just touched on in the last question, is that sometimes staff think students know or understand what skills they're developing. And again, so often at the end of a module or even at the end of the degree course, you say, what skills have you developed? And students like, I can write some essays. And they don't think about, they think sometimes about just hard skills and they don't think about the soft skills as well. So I think staff do often overlook that students aren't that great at kind of understanding in the reflection element of what they've developed during their degree. So finding a way of kind of signposting students to kind of help them understand what they've developed or getting them to reflect on how they've developed during the degree is really important, because again, what you don't want is that, let's say the example I just gave of a student going out into the world and just say, I did a psychology degree, and they say, well, what did you get from the psychology degree? And they're like, I don't know, or I can write an essay, because that's not going to get you a job in the real world. But psychology courses are so rich and so diverse that students develop so many skills and they don't even realize what they're doing at the time. So that would be I think the key thing that people often overlook is the students knowing their own skills.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's a really good point to bear in mind, and having that kind of knowledge of themselves in order to be able to do that. And sometimes staff have to make that knowledge more kind of apparent in students. Handing over to Paul and to Christian now for their contribution and what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, sorry, I had a couple of observations. Thank you so much, Emma. Just to pick out two things, the importance of level 4. I think that I am biased because I do a lot of level 4 teaching, but I think you're absolutely right with that. And I think it's so nice to have that engaged with in the way that you have and acknowledged. I think it can be neglected. It can be kind of seen as a lower priority thing. You just need to pass and so on. It doesn't constitute, in many degree programs, doesn't constitute the actual classification of your degree and so on. And I think all of that thinking misses these skills that are developed during level 4. And it's the best place to do it. I think you're absolutely right. And I really liked what you said about naming the skills that you learn. That is so true. I've seen a lot of CVs and people are really selling themselves short terribly, you know, and not finding a way of articulating what it means to be able to write an essay or to sit an exam on these topics that they covered. So I really appreciate that. So thank you very much for what you covered in those. I wondered if you had any thoughts about how we design teaching and assignments and so on that would support the sort of skills that you want to develop at level 4 and the awareness of the skills that students are learning.
I think having a good thing is the variety of assignments and getting them, getting to do things in different ways, I think is really important. Also, I think I'm a big believer, I know there's always this debate in higher education circles versus over assessing students versus just having high stakes assessments. And I think at level 4, if you can give students kind of low stakes assessments that really kind of build them up and get the practice in, because again, we know that a lot of students are very assessment focused. So again, it's that classic question of, is this topic on the exam? No, well, I won't bother learning it. So by having low stakes assessments, again, gets them engaging with topics, getting them to do things is really important. And again, classroom activities, I think what you're talking about, making things fun. So again, get things like debates. It can often be fun, and you can be playful with topics as well. So we've got kind of classic examples that are often used, but getting students to come up with their own examples and then again discussing them and debating them can really kind of be a bit more fun and a bit more playful and get students engaged. And one of the things I really like is, as well as getting students to self-reflect. So things like we can talk to students about different scales that we use to measure personality and different things. But what's much better is actually getting the students to take those scales themselves and then reflect and potentially discuss how they feel about those scores. Do they think it's a fair representation of themselves as well? So all of these things can be brought in. And again, students do like, a lot of students come onto a psychology degree to kind of find out more about themselves. So being able to play into that. And again, when you were talking about procrastination, again, we can do a lot about that in terms of students understanding a lot about themselves, which will then feed into those study skills.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Emma. If I can just add on to what you and Paul have been saying, I do love the idea that university is a time for students to learn about themselves as well as whatever it is that they're studying. So this idea of study skills, becoming good at that, good at the academic writing, but also this opportunity for them to learn about themselves, learn about their preferences, learn about their strengths, learn about how best to present themselves. I think that's excellent. And, you know, it's only just dawned on me now, but the topics we're talking about, I just love it that we're talking about study skills while at university or even before, as you suggested, Emma, right through to employability, because that's the so what, isn't it? It's the so what is, so what, you've got this degree now. And I guess what we've all touched on is this idea of supporting people to enjoy that process, really get the most out of it, both academics and students. So I've really appreciated what you've just shared and the comments we've made. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I kind of really liked about the book when it was first kind of approached about it, is the fact that quite often we see study skills, something that kind of is mentioned at level 4, and then employability, suddenly students get bombarded in it at level 6. And the idea that the book has both of them combined. And so if students are getting these books, quite often they do at the start of university, then they have the employability stuff in there as well. And it's there because, again, a lot of the employability things that they develop during their degree, again, if they don't particularly like a topic, but they still need to do it and get it done. We all have that in our working lives. There will all be things that we don't particularly enjoy about our work. And say there might be the mystical person out there that everything's wonderful, but we're humans. So again, getting students to kind of confront that and work on it, and still knowing that they may not particularly like something, but they can still do well in it. So again, that motivation factor is really important.
Thank you for that very, very enlightening kind of a discussion there, and some fantastic kind of ideas and takeaways there, and lots of food for thought actually. So we just want to now open up the floor for questions from any of the people attending. So don't forget, if you haven't already written your questions in the question and answer box, that you can do so, and the panel will answer your question. I also have some that came in earlier from people by email, so I'll ask some of those to you as well, but we'll just give the audience a chance to write some of theirs in the question and answer if they have any there for you. live, let's say.
Fawzia, while we're waiting for that, may I just kind of share my appreciation for Sage Publishing as well, and for yourselves, Fawzia, and Donna's on the call as well. Donna Goddard, she's our commissioning editor. She's the one who had the inspiration for many of these books. So I just wanted to acknowledge that it's been wonderful to work for Sage Publishing because of the kind of meaning and purpose that you bring to your work as well, and the commitment and the engagement. So just wanted to say thank you, Fawzia.
Oh, no, thank you. And, you know, it's a pleasure to work with authors like yourselves and, you know, with professionals like yourselves and in the higher education sector. So, you know, for me, it's a pleasure. My work is actually a joy every day, I have to say. I know Emma was talking about that. It might not be the case, but I can honestly say that, you know, sometimes you love what you do. So thank you, Christian. And it's very kind of you. My colleagues and I also extend their thanks as well. So I'm just looking at the question and answer box. There's nothing come through on there, but if you don't mind, I have some here that I got through by email earlier. So I'm just going to read some of those out if we may. And we have about 10 to 15 minutes to answer these. Okay, so I'll just go into the first one. And I think this one will be a good one for Emma, actually, because it's talking about the subject of careers and unemployability. So Emma, what would you say? And actually, not just Emma, I would love to hear from everybody on this too, because, you know, it's a very critical issue. What would you say is a critical period for students' career and employability? You touched on it earlier, but...
Yeah, I think that it's kind of depends on the student, but I think one of the key things to kind of find out from students is, again, their goals when they come into the degree. And again, I always encourage students to keep an open mind. So many students come into a degree saying, I want to be a clinical psychologist, I want to be a forensic psychologist. And I ask them to keep an open mind and think about it. But especially when it is a competitive careers, giving them careers advice from the get-go, getting them to do the volunteering and getting to engage with different groups. It can really help them on a path, and also putting them in contact with other students that have got similar career ambitions. So again, if at level 4 you have a group of incoming students that all say they want to be clinical psychologists, put them in contact with each other, help them start building that network. But then again, I think there are kind of other critical points. So again, talking at level 5, especially when they start thinking about their dissertation topics. So it gives them a really good point to start talking to them again about their career goals. And then we also have this kind of critical period at level 6, often around the January window, where some students will have that panic phase of going, oh my God, I don't know what I'm going to do. So I know the BPS are doing kind of November, I think November this year, they're having a careers week nationally, but then you can also feed in your own local events to that. So again, to help stave off that panic. But again, that January panic thing, talking to students about different masters, different career opportunities, and kind of getting them to think about what do they really kind of want to do in a day-to-day job rather than a job title, I think is important. So as I say, throughout the years, there are different pinch points, I think, but often students will come to it in their own time.
I like the idea of not waiting until you finish your degree to start looking for something, and that's something that I've said in some postgraduate programs that I've taught on as well. And sometimes there's this sense that I really need to have that piece of paper, I need to have that degree before I start looking for a professional role or doing. But my message has always been, you can start now. Don't wait till that moment to start looking for something. And like you say, Emma, a lot of it is the networking, the connecting, the volunteering, every opportunity to get known, connect with people. And so that's great advice.
If I could just very quickly add, I think some programs in a way have sort of built-in careers relevant training. So, you know, therapeutic counselling programs often have placements built in. But I think in a way, for a lot of psychology degrees, it might be more of a case of selecting in. So it might be selecting in relevant experience and so on, relevant work experience, and other activities. I think also there's this thing, I absolutely agree with what you said about building it in from the beginning. And I think that articulation of your skills, getting good at articulating the skills you're getting from level 4 onwards. And then finally, the final year project, I think a lot of students can use that as an opportunity to think about, to really concentrate their mind on how that might connect. That might be a bridge across to some of the topics, themes, and approaches that they're interested in pursuing in a professional life.
Fantastic, thank you. There's another one that came in, which was around, oh, actually, this is a really good one, actually. And it's open to anybody who wants to answer this, because I think it touches on every aspect of what we've been speaking about already. So when the university experience is impacted by factors beyond just the individual person, what would you advise on the best ways to forge relationships or networks which may have been impacted by earlier lockdowns or remote learning, you know, from the pandemic days?
One of the things I would encourage, again, if you can get part of it is getting your university on board, is trying to build in fun. And again, if you can, take your students out on a trip. So giving them an opportunity to engage. One of the trips that I used to like to do at my previous institution was take students on a trip to London, and they'd go to the Freud Museum and the Science Museum. And again, it was a coach ride from Birmingham. So again, a lot of relationships are built on that, but also it was an opportunity to go around and see and discuss relevant topics. So if you can, try and build in some fun to really kind of get students engaged and get them kind of building relationships.
I think that's such brilliant examples, and I was thinking of the Freud Museum as well. I just wonder whether there might be something about thinking about subgroups, demographics of our students who may be particularly prone to experiencing further isolation. And this is partly informed by some of the things that university my son's going to, and some of the things I've seen done at my own university. So often there's lots of activities for on-campus students and fewer for those who are off-campus. And I think having dedicated attention to our off-campus students is quite important as well, because usually there's a lot more points of connection for students who are on campus. And there can be another when our mature students often have multiple complex lifestyle commitments that mean that it's very difficult for them to network in quite the same ways. Finding ways of forging links, working with student unions and so on, finding ways of forging links for our mature student communities, I think, are very important as well. So our off-campus, our mature students, and I think also, again, thinking of diversity, that there can be a stereotype of the type of typical student that might be formed from decades ago. It might have a particular demographic profile, but allowing for different cultures to find means of contact. For example, cultures for whom meeting in a pub might not feel as welcoming or appropriate. So I think kind of keeping that diversity in mind in terms of a religious and cultural orientation, living experience, living off campus might be different to on campus. And in terms of mature students, maybe having different lifestyle commitments and reaching those students for whom isolation could be experienced in a different way.
Okay, any more on that topic, or shall I move to the next question? We have one that's come in from Robin, and it's in your, sorry, wait a second. It's in the question and answer box. So Robin's saying he really appreciates hearing the panel's ideas about how to support students in relation to well-being, study skills, and employability. And it seems much of the success of this work depends on being able to embed this support within the curriculum. I'm wondering if the panel has ideas for how this can be brought in across courses involving multiple colleagues delivering a broad range of modules. Some may be on board already and some may need further convincing. So how can you bring this across different courses to a broader range of modules?
I'd love to have a first, but I'll try and be brief because I know I'm talking a lot. Robin, that's an amazing question. And the reason I wanted to dive in is exactly what I've been involved with. I'm actually working on it this morning, to be honest. So I started by delivering study skills, if I can take that component of your brilliant question. And I taught it in lunch times, and during lockdown I actually increased the frequency. I was doing like a couple of sessions a week or something for a period, and I thought that that was really, really important. And I know that that was doing a good job, but the important thing that you've identified there is it's all very well as an extra lunchtime slot or whatever it is, but we need to embed it in the curriculum, otherwise you're getting a selective audience. Now, it's not, you don't just get higher end students, but you get a disproportionate number of students who are very focused on their academic work and want to move up to the next grade boundary and so on. But you're not getting everyone with all the issues that they experience. So what we did was we actually redesigned our whole program, and we revalidated, and we actually built the study skills into a whole broad module that we deliver that looks at individual learning styles, group work, developing confidence in terms of presentation and skills and so on, and learning things like critical thinking, appropriate academic writing and so on. So it is actually a taught topic embedded in the curriculum. And I think what was important there, I'm not sure I can tell you the how. I'm kind of falling foul of my own issues I raised earlier about the what rather than the how. But what we did need was cooperation right across the board. We needed enough people not only to deliver the module, but to seek its approval for revalidation. But the ethos was there. And I think seeing the sorts of things that Christian and Emma have touched on, the importance of well-being, the importance of employability, seeing that that is really, really key for all higher education institutions, all universities, that just how important that is, and as well as the study skills, seeing the absolute environmental, national, international importance of that has inspired lots of colleagues right across the university to get on board with embedding those skills. And now I'm pretty sure that that's the very best way to do it, rather than an optional select in, select out. Thanks for the great question there.
Yeah, so one of the things that, again, we did, which was actually successful, is we, after semester one, we actually took students that performed poorly on certain assessments, and we kind of called them like key assessments that kind of really kind of showed, especially writing skills at level 4, and actually invited them specifically, named emails went out saying, we want you to come to these sessions. And we did advertise them generally, so other students could come along, but we did very much, and again, got personal tutors on board to talk to students, to get those students to come along to these sessions, because again, you often get the worried well, if that makes sense. One of the things, again, getting staff on board, it's a challenge, and often you kind of talk to staff and you find out why they're kind of a bit reticent, and often, quite often, time comes up. We don't have time to do this. But again, there are lots of lovely books out there and lots of lovely resources out there. So if you can provide staff with, this is actually an almost ready-made seminar activity, it's a quick win and it's effective, that can really help get them on board. So I say providing staff with what they can see as quick wins can really help them get on board. And then once they start having those quick wins, then it kind of brings them more into this ethos as well.
Thank you, Robin. And Fawzia, I know our time is short, so I'll keep it brief. I was just thinking as I was listening to Emma and Paul about the benefits for staff as well of working together on initiatives like this, on the collaboration, in a way that goes beyond, I'm going to do a favor, I'll run a session for your program, or really integrating it and then getting people on board, given that we all know as academics that the lack of some of the skills we're talking about can really impact on that learning experience. And rather than sending people off to say, you need to go on to a writing skills program, how wonderful if it's central to some of the degrees that we're talking about. Thank you both.
Thank you, everybody, for that very, very dynamic discussion. And it's been great to hear all of your thoughts and to hear all of those amazing takeaways and tips and advice that you've been offering. And yeah, I really enjoyed today. One last question. This is one just from me. So how do you look after your own well-being? This is a very quick fire round here.
Well, I'm in Tenerife at the moment, Fawzia. I love to travel, and I make sure that I build travel into my routine, just so that I have the energy I need to, you know, be what students need us to be.
Lovely.
I think the main thing I try and do is kind of just take that time to stop and kind of reflect on what's going on, the positives. We talked about mindfulness at the start, and one of the things that I really love doing is a bit of mindfulness swimming. So just being very focused and being present in the moment. And I don't get on with kind of normal meditation, but for me, mindfulness swimming really works. But again, just taking that moment to stop and appreciate, I think is key.
That's such wonderful answers. So I've got the meditation is important for me, and when I get the opportunity, I love lying on my back in the sea. So I kind of think that I'm with the mindfulness swimming idea as well, actually, and with the heat wave we've been having, that's been okay to do in the UK as well, and of course my family are a source of a lot of activity and a lot of fulfillment as well. So I'm grounded, I hope, a little bit with those three things.
Thank you very much. That's great. There is one last question that came in. Christian, I think you said you wanted to answer that before.
No, Robin was saying that she's going to take some of these ideas into a revalidation process. So I was just going to say an excellent idea, and you have our full support.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Robin. Thank you very much to Christian, to Paul, to Emma, and thank you very much to my colleagues, to Donna Goddard and to Maria Omen-O'Neill. And thank you to everyone for attending today. It's been great to be with you, and it's been a great discussion. Thank you again to the panel. And just before you finish, I'd just like to share the slides again with you to show you that you know, the books that the authors have written and contributed to are available. They're available in a bundle. So if you want to purchase those, you can get them via the sagepub.co.uk website. There's a QR code there, or through your bookseller. Or if you want individual copies as inspection copies, just contact your local academic sales consultant. There's the link on there as well. So finish off today. Thank you very much again. And yes, have a great evening or afternoon where you are. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you again for arranging this.
Brilliant.